attention. Now, I'll go straight into the Netherlands here. The Telegraaf, which is a very popular newspaper there, is reporting now that Pieter Omtzigt has decided to found his own party for the upcoming elections in November, the general election that was precipitated by the collapse of the current five-way coalition. Omtzigt is a cut above all of the previous one-man and one-woman parties which have been set up in the last 20 years, Brian. So this is going to be one to watch, going back to even before I came to the Netherlands, but since the turn of the millennium, you had the since assassinated Pim Fortuyn was the first guy who tried to do this when he got disenchanted with the existing parties. Then you had Rita Verdonk, who was anti-immigration. And then, of course, you had the Thierry Baudet movement, which became Forum for Democracy, has gone far beyond a one-man effort now. Geert Wilders becoming the Party for Freedom, and a lot of others that have, while sitting in Parliament, decided to go it alone. They have all been derided by the Hague establishment as not having what it takes, whereas Pieter Omtzigt, who's often correctly described as too Christian for the Christian Democrats, which is why he's leaving, has really some battle scars, forcing disclosures out of civil servants who are extremely unwilling, as hostile as Washington, and that's saying something about the targeting unlawfully through suspicions and prejudice of certain ethnic groups who were in receipt of child benefit, which caused a number of suicides and a wave of despair, the targeting of the farmers, which people are more aware of abroad. So definitely I'm going to flag that up, and we'll see what we can do through the later summer and autumn to report on Dutch politics. It is a very splintered scene. Germany next door seems to be following what I recently reported on with regard to the Dutch cartel of parties, as they're sometimes called, wanting to ban the Forum for Democracy because they say the wrong things. And here, Winston Smith, an obvious nom de plume inspired by 1984, George Orwell, blogging as Escaping Mass Psychosis, can't believe that Germany is once again thinking about banning political parties. Having said, that this is something that the Greens would not largely benefit from, he comes to this at the end. The stupidity of this move cannot be overstated. This is the bit I'd like to major on rather than despairing, because it shows that the end of the regime, the fin de siècle, is near. It's almost comically ridiculous in its outward appearance, as we've been reporting recently, that Alternative für Deutschland might be banned as it reaches the quarter of the electorate level of support. It comes off as some kind of accelerationist propaganda. Read Ian Davis on our website to understand that. It's just laughable buzzwords. The meat of the article earlier on, though, in the blog, says this rather tellingly, and this is again transnationally true. It's also known that the Greens, not just in Germany, gain benefit from the existence of parties which can be tied with nationalism. So even though it's always the Greens, especially in Germany, who say Germany must die the death, we mustn't mention Germany in official documents, we're just a piece of ground at anyone's welcome, nevertheless, they gain from the Punch and Judy show, because the mainstream press is ideologically socialist. That's new left, not proper old left. Therefore, attacks are targeted to the right. It sways voters to the left. And what you see in the last few years around continental Europe is people think they're being really hip and rebellious by voting Green. But the Greens are the Clinton-style Greens now. A couple of years ago, the Clintons personally came to Germany's elections 1 October to see how well the Greens were doing. It's possibly they're taking their Chicago machine with them. Eugyppius, I never tire of recommending, who's now left academia, a really incisive German with, as usual for this top tier of German bloggers, better English than us, says this about the related issue of the climate hype, which of course is closely allied with the Green cause. It's been hijacked since the original Green parties. He says that the windmills will keep turning and the electric vehicle subsidies will keep flowing, but climate ideology will give way to more standard programs in the Green Party. Think of the SNP Scottish Green coalition, which is on the verge of falling apart, with SNP seniors saying we cannot deal with these nutters. So Eugyppius says that even in Germany, with the biggest Green Party share in the world, basically, social justice and entitlements will be the new order of the day. It will be a new left, basically, and the movement will gradually self-assimilate into the rest, of the regime allied parties. What else does Eugyppius say? Speaking earlier in the blog about a trivial matter, he says what we learn from it about the Greens is that the technocrats within the party, the climate scarers, have had nothing but defeat and embarrassment, again paralleled in Scotland's coalition. Their cataclysmic proposals are seen as out of touch, so there's now a fissure in the party. So it's not hard to imagine a near future Germany or other such countries in which the Greens, despite the name of their party, ditch climate policies in favour of handout policies, basically, and Atlantis posturing by Annalena Baerbock, who's got in the news this week for her plane having to dump 200,000 tons of, 20,000 tons of kerosene in 2 failed attempts to take off from Dubai. Democracy
liters maybe.
Yes. Democracy for Ukraine, money for poor children, rainbow flags on every street corner, and let the EU figure out how to dewarm the earth. So you see, one of the things coming out of this is that Germany so identifies now with the EU that AfD is going to be banned, as the previous blog I showed suggested, not only because they talk about remigration, which is a term that the establishment really takes horror at, but equally, or almost equally, because they say we can imagine a future without the EU. Björn Höcke, I think the next slide talks about this, Politico, has got a German journalist doing a hatchet job on not the leader, but the most popular man in the party now, Björn Höcke, for this very reason. He recently said the EU must die so that the European countries can live. And this was in a recent Deutsche Welle piece I shared as well, that Höcke, the Deutsche Welle people then got a rent-a-quote from a historian saying, oh, this reminds me of Stalingrad when Hitler said, or Goebbels said that our soldiers must die so that Germany can live. I mean, really wildly idiotic hatchet jobs. But the point being made here is that the German establishment, and now at Brussels level with this Politico piece, written by a German, of course, is to come up with the cock and bull story that the AfD is run by absolute extremists. Irmhild Bosdorf is another one they take aim at because she talks about lowering migration. And so, the amount of scarism here is really off the charts. But moving swiftly on, we have Russia really wanting to redraw the map of Europe again. And I don't have time for commentary. We'll maybe get to this in extra time. It's a very subtle issue, at least for me, because it was my area of deep expertise a decade and a half ago with the British government. But this is a really signal move that Medvedev, who is deputy chair of the Russian Security Council, not the big hitter you'd think, although he was president before Putin, between Putin's 2 terms in office. But Medvedev is more of a loudmouth in Russian politics, but as you know, Brian, not afraid of taunting the West in extreme terms. Now he's saying that Russia might do what it's done with the 4 entities from eastern Ukraine, which it has now annexed, which, as again, I can't go into the details in the main news of what this would do to the Caucasus, but it's a redrawing of the map, really, on a level with Kosovo and the Ukraine war. And it's really a prelude to Russia absorbing Georgia by some means again. And so there we go. What's happening elsewhere in the Ukraine war? Well, 2, I would say, punching above their weight NATO members, ones that you have a high esteem for, Brian, the Netherlands and Denmark, have been leaned upon by their American allies through NATO channels to give F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. Mr. Zelensky has come up with some interesting numbers that can't really make sense, because he said we're going to get 42 F-16s, a huge number, Brian, reminiscent of The Answer to Life, the Universe and Everything, if you know your recent British dissident fiction. But nevertheless, the 2 prime ministers, Rutte and Mette, in Denmark, have not given such numbers. The Danish prime minister spoke of perhaps rustling up 6. Mark Rutte has said no number at all. And meanwhile, the Air Force Times, a sister paper to the one we just featured, the US Military Times, Air Force Times says that the air war is now shaping up. Famously, it was something that was conspicuous by its absence in the first year. They are admitting here, Brian, in the form of the most senior US Air Force general in Europe, Mr. Hecker, that their top priority is figuring out countering air and missile defenses, jamming, EW, and other anti-access capabilities. Because of the Ukraine war changing the agenda, air forces are becoming active policemen in certain areas of airspace. And he's more or less admitting that the Baltic corridor, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, less so now Finland's joined NATO, but still, they're the ones, the outliers, and they're going to be aggressively defended, as it were, by policing missions. I don't know what you make of that. Just one more before I put it back to you is a call to deep specialists in air power. The Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies has a quite high-ranking podcast guest here. It's obviously a US podcast. Their guest this time is Air Marshal Harvey Smyth, not the Air Chief Marshal, but he is the Air and Space Commander for the rapidly diminishing Royal Air Force. I have a sense that our old Air Force hands who watch could, if they go to this in the show notes, give it a careful listen. I don't think this happens very often at this level, and I think they're going to find a few giveaways here, which I would be delighted, or as would Brian, to receive communications about.
Yeah, well, my comment is that if you've got senior military people using language like we're trying to figure out how to handle air defence, what they're really saying is that they're floundering around because they've realised that the Russians at the moment have an extremely strong and effective air defence, which is going to handle F-16s as easily as any other aircraft which it's dealt with, but more on that another time. Well, let's switch from matters geopolitical to matters a bit more earthy. And Debbie, you've been having a close look at Eden.
I have, yes, not more for. I actually live 2 minutes up the road or down the road from the Eden Project here in Cornwall. And my huge thanks to Ben Rubin, who sent me a number of links. And I just want to explore with you one of the links that he sent me, because going on at the Eden Project in November is a massive conference. Who with, you might ask? Well, it's an organisation called Anthropy, and this is this conference is taking place 1st to the 3rd of November, a leadership gathering at Eden. So, what's Anthropy's